Ladies and gentlemen, we're going to be discussing DirectX 12. So this is actually a fairly lengthy interview which Chris Roberts has given with Gamer Nexus. Now, this is not going to be a full analysis because I just want to cover specific points here. Mostly because I do want to go into some in-depth analysis of Vulkan over the next couple of days, which will tie in rather nicely with this. But I do want to discuss a few specific points because I think they're rather interesting. So for the most part, we're going to be discussing DirectX 12 specifics rather than implementation necessarily of other APIs and efficiencies, that type of thing, which I think is probably the best way for us to go because I'm rather behind when it comes to Vulkan, simply because I've just been absolutely inundated with doing other things. I'm reviewing a few pieces of hardware at the moment, which has slowed me down. Anyway, I digress. I've been digressing for about a minute, so let's get on with this, shall we? So, there are a couple of points I really want to discuss. First of all, what about DirectX 12 in terms of ease of implementation? So in other words, how easy is it to actually utilize DirectX 12? Well, the answer is pretty easy if you want to utilize it the same methods as you were with DirectX 11, but, as Chris points out, you are, quote, not going to be using its full power. The issue, and this is his quote, the issue is that most game engines were not written with massive parallel architectures in mind, and that's fundamentally what you need to get the best benefits of next generation APIs. That next generation is just something that's feeding a lot of stuff at the same time with graphics, and you're not bottleneck it with just one thread. Now, he gave an example of CryEngine. Everyone knows what CryEngine, of course, is, because, well, it's one of the most infamous engines out there. It's a really beautiful engine. Back in the days of the Xbox 360, there were three main threads, worker threads. One for rendering, one for the main game, and one for physics. Now that scaled rather well to PCs, and the engines moved towards a job approach as opposed to a thread approach. So a job approach is when you say, hey, here's a task, bam, and it kicks off to the job manager. The job manager manages hundreds of thousands of these amongst the process of threads is available. It's this kind of thing which thinks of your task differently, compartmentalizing it and making it sure it's not just dependent on other data. So CryEngine itself has been jobified quite substantially over the past couple of iterations. So we know when you're building a high-spec PC, you have more threads available and with more power than you do with a next-generation console. Part of that is a big task because the rendering CryEngine was built with much more conception of one thread. A bunch of stuff gets put into the renderer pipeline and then rendered out, and it assumes it's all rendered in the same space, area, etc. And we need to compartmentalize that and do a better job of individual resources rather than one monolithic rendering pipeline. Over Unreal Engine 4, it was originally very much like CryEngine, with the same sort of delineation of threads. I haven't looked at UE code recently, but what I was like quite a while ago, I think fundamentally is some definite work that's been done to happen at a low level to make the game's engine to push towards DirectX 12. So, he also points out that the Square Enix demo was actually not that bad. He said it's actually not too difficult to implement because it was just pushing raw polygons. The look at the graphics card it was on, you could probably do the same with DirectX 11, but it would have required brute force. You really see the benefits of DirectX 12 is going to be more about doing a low-level refraction. Then you're going to be getting some pretty interesting performance, even on some PCs that aren't that powerful. So if you're not too familiar with what the hell I just, talked about for the last few minutes, it's quite simple. In a nutshell, excuse me, I'm still dying of a cold. In a nutshell, he basically was referring to DirectX 12, if you want to just implement little parts of it, little bits and pieces, like for example, little bits for the renderer or the shadow implementation and this type of stuff, it's not too bad. It's actually quite simple in the grand scheme of things to do, but to get the most out of it, to get the full performance, your game engine really at the core needs to support DirectX 12. It needs to be built with parallel workloads in mind. In other words, where you'll have, for example, one worker thread which will set up jobs as and when. So in other words, if you've got, let's say you've got a simple example, let's say you've got 4 cores. So we're just going to call them core A, core B, core C, and so on. Well, generally it'll be called core 0, 1, 2, 3. Just so you're aware, that's typically how they start. They always count from core 0, but we're going to just call them A, B, C. What will typically happen on a lot of highly parallel engines is you'll have core A, which will be the main worker. It will actually set up the jobs for the other processor cores. So let's say you're taking a very small time slice, in other words, just maybe one frame of animation. You'll have a setup where core A will say, hey, there's some time available on core B. I'm going to set a job, which is effectively just a piece of work for it to for that core to actually, calculate. And then once that core frees up that, once that core has completed it, it will then obviously, have time available, and therefore another job will be submitted. Now, I have vastly simplified that, but I have discussed that with multi-threading and DirectX 12 before, so if you do want to have a look at it, you could certainly have a look at the Uncharted or the Naughty Dog analysis. I do have them on redgamingtech.com and this channel. They were really good if you want to learn about parallel workloads across the CPU. You could also check out my DirectX 12 analysis as well, so you can just search for those. But I don't want to bog this video down too much technical detail, because otherwise it's going to get really lengthy really fast. And yes, that is what she said. Anyway, so draw calls, like everyone tell you, he continues, you can only push so much through one pipe, and that's the thing you can do with DirectX 12 or Vulkan. If you factor your engine correctly, you're not bottlenecked by draw calls. You can push out, say, 100 times more draw calls for the same amount of time, and that's obviously a big factor. They say that they don't actually bake textures onto characters anymore, so they have their base character that they will delineate in a 3D program, the areas that would be material 1, 2, 3, and so on. So if there's only 4 different materials on a character, there'd be one draw call, and it's an index lookup from a material that's much higher resolution on the PBR material, so you can have a really high texel density and really scale. You can get right up in the camera, it's not going to break down. For us, that's the kind of tech where we've been doing with characters and smaller props to allow us to really have the fidelity to get super close-ups. But it's sort of how the world has many assets and scope from. He also goes to point out that this is very similar to the Order 1886. Now, if you want to know about more of this material stuff, I'm going to send you to something else. If you have no idea what the hell a baked-in material is or any of that stuff, you can check out my full analysis of the Order 1886 where I go into a load of detail. Now, it's not for any other reason other than otherwise for me to explain that stuff. I'm going to be here for about 10 minutes. So if you know what it is, great, all power to you. If you don't really care that much, just know that it's a lot more efficient and a lot more powerful than what they've got now. But if you do want to know, then once again, check out the Order 1886 analysis available on redgamingtech.com, or you can search for it on this very channel. Do remember that at its heart, as we get more complicated scenes, as we increase the level of complexity, this is particularly true of games like Star Citizen, where there's not just like a closed environment, you get massive views of the battlefield. So as we start getting more stuff on screen, the actual complexity of the geometric objects which are used to actually render the scene, the polygons, if you will, the actual shapes, the actual building blocks, I guess you could call them, of the scene, which textures adhere to, and even things such as lighting, all this stuff, it really becomes complicated, incredibly complicated. So what starts happening is, yes, a lot of this stuff, it does get pushed over to the GPU, but the CPU still needs to actually tell the GPU what to do. And that's why, of course, we have so much emphasis now on DirectX 12 and Vulkan, because they become more efficient, more powerful, and we get to really utilize things like compute shaders in a much more efficient manner. We have things like executing direct, where the GPU can handle its own instructions, at least to a degree. It can't, as far as what we understand at the moment, it can't be as complicated as a CPU based instruction, but it certainly can handle some of its own instructions, which is really helpful for repetitive tasks. It helps to reduce the bandwidth taken up from like the PCIe communication. DirectX 12 and Vulkan are going to be really interesting over the next few years. Now, I, for one, really look forward to it. Anyway, I'm going to have to get going because as much as I want to continue to talk about this, I'm at the verge of where I think my voice is going to explode. Hopefully you've enjoyed the video. Hopefully I'll be back to normal this weekend. I am completing a large review. I know I've been saying that for the last couple of days, but Jesus, it's like an absolute gargantuan undertaking. It's easily the largest review I've ever done. And unfortunately, some of this is still a learning process for me. So it's kind of like, what's the most efficient way of doing this? I don't know. There's no guide of what's the most efficient way to review something. Plus as well, because of Skylake, which I think you all know I'm reviewing Skylake by now, we're actually reviewing different memory configurations, different audio configurations, different overclocking settings, God knows what else. So it's a pretty big undertaking, to be honest with you, because it's board, memory and CPU that I'm actually reviewing all simultaneously, along with a water cooler as well. So it's a bit of a mission because I've been quite sick as well, so I've not been able to throw in as much work as normal, which is unfortunate. But anyway, I will hopefully have that up this weekend along with some other stuff. But for now, I'm going to get going because I'm on the verge of exploding my voice box. But hopefully you've enjoyed the video. I'll see you soon. Take care. Bye for now.